In this video, I'm going to be making a racing game in Bevy and Rust without the help of pre-built vehicle systems like wheel colliders in Unity or chaos vehicles in Unreal Engine. It's also going to be much harder because I'm going to be doing all this in an ECS or entity component system, while also being without an editor like Unity or Unreal would have. This video won't be a full-fledged tutorial on making car physics, but I will occasionally explain code snippets. If you are a somewhat seasoned Bevy user, you should be able to follow along and create your own car in Bevy. Remember, if this video entertained you or helped you out in some way, consider dropping a like and hit that subscribe button. With that out of the way, let's hop into the video. I'll be using Bevy Rapier 3D for this game since I need some basic rigid body and collider support for the game. I started out with a block, but this isn't any block.
It floats.
This block makes use of something that we call suspension. It basically places 4 springs with a certain degree of dampening on the 4 corners of the block to simulate bounciness whenever the car is dropped from a height, sort of like how the 4 wheels of a car would hold it up. I did this by shooting 4 raycasts in each of the corners of the block, calculating the compression for each raycast by using its time of impact and the height that we allowed the car to stay at. We will then apply a force locally upwards using the compression while simultaneously performing manual damping on the object. I also performed some damping using Rapier's damping constants to really tune the bounciness. Next, I made the block be able to accelerate forward and backwards with the W and S keys. Finally, I made the player able to rotate by using the A and D keys by applying torque to the object, which basically causes the object to rotate smoothly using physics in either direction. Because the camera was currently just snapping behind the object when we let go of a key, I changed the controls so that it always followed the object, but the rotation interpolated smoothly to the desired location, and I think we have a much smoother camera now. Because the ground was just fully flat, I couldn't even tell I was moving around. I decided to make a mesh in Blender and add it into the game as a test. It worked out quite well. However, while exploring this map, I noticed an issue. When the car flipped over, we were still able to accelerate, so I made it so we had to flip back over before we could drive again. There's supposed to be a trick where if you lower the center of mass enough, you won't be able to flip over. However, I did not know how to change the center of mass in Bevy Rapier 3D, and when I did, it just didn't work, which I don't know why. While exploring the map, I noticed an issue. When the car flipped over, we were still able to accelerate. To fix this, I decided to only let the player control the car when it had at least 2 wheels on the ground. I also made the camera lock rotation when the car was in the air to make a more dramatic effect. At this point, I also managed to fix the problem with center of mass, and the car would flip over less often now. I expected it to never flip over, but I guess you can't have everything. We had been staring at a block for too long, so I started to add wheels into the game. I made a wheel model in Blender and slapped it into the game. I positioned the wheels 2 different ways. If we were in the air, it would be positioned just below the 4 corners of the box. If we were currently hitting the ground with our raycasts, it would be spawned just above where the raycasts had hit the ground. You may have noticed that the wheels look very unnatural right now. That is because they are following the rotation of the car and not changing when we are swerving the car left and right. To change this, I kept the back wheels stationary and rotated the wheels in the front by an offset left and right whenever the player held down the keys to move left and right. In case you haven't noticed, the car was bouncing off the walls like crazy. I mean, just look at this thing. So it was time to add some mass to the player. However, while adding the mass, we had to increase all the forces being added to the player so that they would still behave the same way as before with the added mass. I noticed that after increasing the mass, our center of mass that sat below the player started working in our favor and helping the car to stay upright many more times than it would have before. This was a very stupid oversight by me because I guess this is expected because the very name has mass in it. You can see that the car has remained much more stable than before, while also maintaining the same speed and relative bounciness. The car did decrease in bounciness a bit, but that's probably for the best because the controls are much more playable now, and I have to try to make the car flip over by applying impulses with the spacebar. Before we do anything else, we should probably make a 3D model for the car and its wheels because we've been stuck with a block for so long. I hopped into Blender and started making the chassis of the vehicle. Of course, I'm no car designer, so I went on the internet to find a front and side profile of a car that I could use for reference. I usually have a lot of trouble finding these profiles when I'm trying to model other things, but this time I even found a profile that displayed the car in 4 different angles. You can see that I've placed them into 4 different orientations in order to simulate a 3D car the best. There are 2 separate parts of the car that I'm going to model, the chassis and the wheels. I've only put the time-lapse of the chassis into the video, but I also made the wheels off camera. Now I will say that, although I'm not doing it perfectly, the ability to create objects by extruding vertices and faces from a single plane or primitive shape is a really useful skill to learn in 3D modeling and art design in actual games. A lot of people will start off with sculpting, but this is really limited to organic creatures and humans, which are only one part of a game. Background objects and many mechanical or sharp objects cannot be created from pure sculpting. Besides, you will always end up remeshing it to improve performance by using polymodeling in combination with modifiers such as shrink wrap anyway. After the 3D models were finished, I changed the hitbox of the card to correspond with the actual model so that it would be more accurate, and because I was too lazy to arrange the wheels to fit the car model. This definitely looks a lot better than a cube, although you can see by the legendary topology that my 3D modeling skills definitely need some work. Now that we had a fully functional controller for the player to control their vehicle, it's time to actually make some gameplay. The first and most obvious thing I got to work on doing was expanding the current map to be much larger than its current size and optimizing it for our player controller. However, I noticed that our camera kept clipping through the map, so I shot a raycast from the camera to our player and made sure the camera was right in front of the obstruction so that we would always have view of the vehicle. I also added a texture and a normal map texture to the course, because although this is a prototype, you can see how it makes the game look a lot better, even though we literally only have a car controller with not even a tiny detail of polish. In fact, I bet none of you noticed that this is just a desaturized texture from one of my other videos, where I made an FPS game in Bevy. You guys should totally go check that out, the link is in the description. While doing this, I made the turns less abrupt at times and also got to work designing different types of obstacles that allow the player to utilize movement in more ways than one while doing things. You can see this in action with these protrusions from the floor that make the player carefully control their car to maneuver around them and avoid wasting time. Another thing that I designed was a central hub which the player will always go to whenever they fall into an area that is not designed to kill them. Technically kill them by soft locking the player into navigating to the start of the level. Of course, you should keep in mind that all of the mechanics in this game right now are designed with a sort of proof of concept laziness in mind, so none of this is final. At this point, we are basically done with the game. One final touch that I added was a timer which displayed how long it had taken you to get through the level. With that, we have finished making a proof of concept racing game with custom car physics in Bevy. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. I know that a lot of you are going to click on this video and want to create your own car physics in Bevy. However, some of you don't have the skills to implement the systems yourself. Since car physics are substantially less difficult than an FPS game, which I probably will never make a tutorial on, if enough of you really want an in-depth tutorial on how to make vehicle physics in Bevy, show me that you want the tutorial by liking and subscribing and commenting to the pinned comment below. If there are enough people that want the tutorial, I will happily make one. Have a good day, everyone.